something different and ask someone who is nearer to you in terms of age and experience to talk about their experiences of law school and to give you some advice for the future. And I'm delighted to introduce to you Sean Lau. Sean, last year, won the most prestigious academic scholarship available, the Rhodes Scholarship to study at Oxford. Note that he's the third UNSW lawyer in the last 2 years to win this, an extraordinary record of success. During his time at UNSW, Sean was awarded first-class honours and the university medal. He is the kind of top-performing academic success story that goes on to get a Rhodes Scholarship. But he was also somebody who was selected as the valedictorian of his graduating class. And that means he was the person who made the greatest all-round contribution to the life of the law school in his graduating year. So it's with great pleasure I ask Sean to come and speak to you this morning.
Well, thank you, Professor Dixon, for that very kind introduction and for calling me young. Thank you as well for inviting me to speak today. It's a great privilege to be able to welcome such a talented group of students to the law school. I'm really excited for each of you because you each have the next 5 or so years to study the fundamentals of our legal system and about the wonderful tool that law can be in bringing justice and equality to our society. More than that, I'm really excited because you each have the next 5 or so years to figure out and define what you want to do and who you want to be in that society. For the bit more than half of you who have just finished year 12, I'm sure that you found that you left high school as very different people compared to when you came in. University will be similarly formative. So my hope is that you'll use your time here to grow and mature as individuals, even from your first year of law school, and to figure out what sort of mark you'd like to leave in this world. When I was in my first year of law school, second semester, I was taught tort law by Professor Prue Vines, a very highly regarded member of the faculty here who's sitting at the front. In our first class, she asked us who'd actually done the casebook readings. So I stuck up my hand and I said, I got really frustrated by the chapter we had to look at. I think it would have been better if the author had been more explicit about what they actually thought. And Prue said, I wrote that chapter. Now, my not checking who actually wrote the book before I went into my torts class is an example of a bad decision. I've made plenty of bad decisions throughout my life so far. Let me tell you about another. Halfway through my 4th year of uni, I had a job interview with Justice Virginia Bell, a judge of the High Court, to work for her for a year after I graduated. By a miracle, I did get the job, and I know now that Justice Bell is one of the coolest people I've ever met. But at the time, I was extremely nervous, having never met a High Court judge before. I wanted to make a good first impression, so I made sure to dress well for the interview. So, when I went to it, I was in my first work suit that actually fitted me well, and which I'd bought from David Jones 3 days earlier. And I had tied my tie properly for the first time in my life, having been taught how to do a proper double Windsor knot earlier that morning by YouTube. When I arrived outside Justice Bell's chambers, because I had spare time, I went to the bathroom. But then, as I was washing my hands at the sink, I accidentally splashed water over my new suit jacket, and I realized I didn't have enough time for it to dry naturally. This brings me to the bad decision I made, namely that I tried to use the bathroom's hand dryer to dry my jacket. See, the thing is, a hand dryer is fine for drying hands, believe it or not, but it's incredibly awkward to put something as bulky as a suit jacket under it. So as I went into the interview, which I had been trying to dress well for, I went in wearing a suit that was not only damp, but also crumpled. And I'll just finish the story by pointing out that after I left the interview, I de-stressed by getting KFC. Can I share with you yet another bad decision, but one that's a bit more important than the first two? At the start of my first year of university, I combined my law degree with commerce instead of arts, even though I knew that really, having studied philosophy at high school, I was much more interested in the humanities. I decided to choose commerce because I'd been told that with commerce law, I could become an investment banker, an especially prestigious career, at least before the GFC. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, so I went along with the suggestion. But I ended up really not enjoying commerce much at all. I was fortunate in that I had an amazing first-year law teacher who convinced me to switch halfway through the year to arts, which I loved. Commerce law had been the wrong decision for me. Now, I'm absolutely not saying, just to be clear, that everyone who studies commerce law has made a bad decision, but just that I, in my circumstances, did. Now, the theme of what I'd like to talk to you about today is how to make decisions. But before I get to that, there are a couple of things I should say. First, congratulations for getting into this law school, one of the hardest to get entry into in the country, as might be expected of a law school of this caliber. Secondly, you arrive at this law school at a time when the world is changing very quickly, and when what once seemed irrevocably settled is now open to question. There are too many changes to list, even if I knew what they all were. But to just give you one example, the fundamental value of Australia's legal system is something called the rule of law. You'll learn a lot more about it in your first law subject, Introducing Law and Justice. But the simplified definition that I'll give you is that the rule of law is the idea that everyone should be governed and protected by the law, rather than subjected to the arbitrary decisions of individuals in a capricious way. However, as the Australian legal system and legal profession become increasingly squeezed by economic pressures, such that law becomes seen as simply another product to be sold, there's an open question about what will happen to the rule of law in its dealings with the values of the marketplace. And I don't know how that question will quite play out throughout our lifetimes. It's significant changes like this in the world around you that you need to constantly expect as you get older. And that's the world in which you're going to have to make those decisions. Making those decisions will often be very difficult, because in a world of constant flux, you'll only have imperfect and incomplete information by which to figure out what's best. Or while you'll seek advice from mentors about what to do, you'll find that things may have changed since they were at your stage of life, such that the advice that they offer may not be quite up to date. That's why I want to talk to you about decision making today. As should be clear from before, I have no pretensions of being a good decision maker. But what I can tell you about is what I've personally learned from making or watching other people make bad decisions. You all, of course, have already made some important decisions. An obvious one would be to study law here. And you all would have different reasons for making that decision. And you all have many more decisions ahead of you. Some will be important, like what you want to do with the rest of your lives. Some won't be, like which socks you'll wear tomorrow. Some decisions will seem important at the time, but afterwards, you'll realize that they really weren't. And some decisions may end up to be a lot more important than you anticipated. For example, in 2008, my sister, who also went to this law school, went on exchange. She would have thought her decision of where to go was important, but she couldn't have anticipated exactly how important it would end up being. She went to the University of California, Los Angeles, where she met her future husband. Now, it seems to me that the best way to explain to you what I've learned from making bad decisions is by reference to two ideas that frequently come up in this context. Those ideas are, one, that you should do what keeps your options open, and two, that you should do what you love. But what I've learned, and what I like to suggest, is that while these ideas aren't wrong, they also aren't completely right. So, for the first idea, that you should do what keeps your options open, you may have come to law school without having worked out your long-term goals. Or you may have decided that you want to make a difference in this world, but you're not quite sure how to do that yet. In which case, the idea is that you shouldn't shut down your possibilities for what to do too early. I think it's common, for instance, for people to choose the degree that they'll combine with law based on what they think will maximize their eventual employment prospects. I should say that there is wisdom in deciding things based on what keeps your options open. It shows prudence, and it acknowledges the fact that you can't be certain about how everything will occur in your life. Still, as I reflect on my law school days, I realize that the idea hasn't personally served me well at all, although I'll come back to my own experience at the very end. That doesn't mean I think the idea is wrong. As law students, you'll learn that you can't be black and white about a number of things, and this is one of them. It does mean, however, that you need to appreciate that the idea has limits. The problem is that if you do what keeps your options open because you haven't decided yet what you really want to do, what you've just done is delayed that decision to some further point in the future. And if you keep delaying the decision of what you really want to do, you'll never end up actually making it. And so never commit yourself to anything that's really worthwhile. That risk is compounded by another factor, which is that what keeps your options open is usually something that's prestigious. That is, if your main priority is to not shut down possibilities, that typically requires you to choose certain work experiences and extracurricular activities that others value as the prestigious thing to do. Working at a law firm, and particularly doing a summer clerkship in your second last year of law school, are examples of prestigious work experience. Being a member of this law school's law journal, or doing something you'll learn about called mooting, would be examples of prestigious extracurricular activities. Now, don't get me wrong, there are valuable skills that you can pick up through activities like these, and I'm not telling you to avoid doing something just because it is prestigious. Prestige does have some real practical advantages. To take a simple example, right now I'm giving you the speech, having accepted the Dean's gracious invitation to do so. But the thing is, I am not, and I certainly don't consider myself to be, a better or a more important person than any of you. I'm just another human being like you, and I'm acutely aware that I have my own substantial failings and insecurities and profound flaws. And yet, because I've won some prestigious awards that others value, I've been given the opportunity to speak here today and to share with you some things that are important to me. What I am trying to highlight to you, however, is that while there is a particularly prestigious path for law students and graduates to follow, it's a path that's both narrow and time-consuming. It's also a path that's especially visible and which tends to crowd out others, in that the people who are on it are often more vocal about that fact than everyone else. The path advises you to do as many prestigious things during law school as you can, like mooting, law journal, or working at a law firm. And I should just note, having done all those three things, I can say that they're very time-intensive. You should then graduate law school with first-class honors. In your first year out, you should work for a judge, ideally at the High Court, but the federal and Supreme Courts are acceptable. After that, you can work for a law firm for a long time and try to make partner, or alternatively, you can work for a law firm for just a bit and then go overseas, do a postgraduate law degree, come back to Australia, and become a barrister. I should be clear that I do know people who have gone down that path and who are having satisfying and meaningful careers that they love. But I also know many others who have taken that path, but ended up profoundly unhappy because, putting aside all concerns of prestige, they've never done anything that they found really worthwhile to do. Instead, they found themselves working such long hours on tasks that are tedious and unfulfilling that they don't even have the mental energy to contemplate the alternatives. That sort of thing is a real shame, not only for them, but also for everyone else. Because the people I'm referring to are really talented and could have done some really good things elsewhere. So while I'm not going to tell you not to do the prestigious thing that keeps your options open, I'd like to encourage you to reflect really carefully before doing it. Above all, you need to keep in mind that it may squeeze out the precious time you have to look for or try something different. The advice I was given, which I agree with, is that you shouldn't do something only because it's prestigious, but either you should genuinely enjoy doing it, or you should test out if you would enjoy it. This brings me to the second idea about decision making I mentioned earlier, that you should do what you love. This is advice that is very frequently given, that famously includes in 2005 by Steve Jobs, the then CEO of Apple, when he said, "You've got to find what you love and don't settle." And I think people often offer this advice as an antidote to the proposition that you should do what's prestigious. That is, if you do what you love, you're much more likely to do better at it, even if it's not that prestigious a thing to do. Like the first idea, I think that there's a lot of truth in this one. It is a great privilege to be able to do what you love. But also like the first idea, I think we need to take this one with a bit of a grain of salt. I think it has two problems. The first is that the idea can mislead us into thinking that work we don't love lacks value, even though that work might still perform an important service to others. To take a trivial example, I don't think that many people set out to become cleaners or garbage collectors, but those occupations provide invaluable assistance to other people, and we shouldn't demean them. To be clear, I'm not telling you to become cleaners or garbage collectors, although I'm not telling you to dismiss those possibilities. What I am trying to highlight is that for many decisions you make, the right thing to do won't be what you love, but it'll be what's the morally responsible thing to do. One philosopher, Immanuel Kant, went so far as to say that you should not aim to do what makes you happy, instead you should do what makes you worthy of happiness. Sometimes an option will be the responsible one because of the people immediately around you. That's a situation of people who stick to jobs that they hate because they need to keep a steady income to support their families. Sometimes, however, an option will be the responsible one because of slightly more philosophical reasons, such as out of concerns of social justice. I've met some brilliant lawyers who could have pursued lucrative commercial careers, but ended up taking jobs at places like the Northern Territory Aboriginal Legal Service, where they've done some incredible work for some of the most disadvantaged people in Australian society. I have to say in relation to this, that there have actually been studies finding that Australian law students become less idealistic and more cynical as they progress through their studies. The first year law student, you guys, says, "I want to save the world." The final year law student says, "I just want to get a job." The reasons for this disillusionment are complex, and I certainly don't want to deny the very real financial and social pressures that you'll face when you get older, and which some of you will already be facing now. Still, I would like to encourage you not to let go of a sense of moral responsibility towards the people in our society who are disadvantaged or who haven't had the same opportunities as you. In that respect, I'm reminded of what the novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky once said, that it's easy to love humankind from far away, but hard to love it up close. In other words, retaining a sense of moral responsibility towards your fellow human beings requires being actively involved in their lives and seeing their struggles from up front. A commitment to human rights or social justice or to serving the disadvantaged is purely narcissistic unless you have a concrete experience of the people you're trying to serve. That's why, for example, the volunteering and internship opportunities you'll get in your later years of law school are so valuable, because they let you work firsthand with some of the people who need the protection of the law most. But there's a second and more practical problem with the idea that you should do what you love. It's that more often than not, you don't know what you would love doing. And figuring that out is a long and drawn-out process. When I was a first-year law student, I had little life experience. I had just come out of some very sheltered high school years, and I really didn't have a clue about what was going on in the wider world around me. If you happen to be in circumstances like that, it's very difficult to figure out what you really want to do with your life. So what do you do if you don't know what you love? The answer, I think, is that you need to go through a period of experimentation and of accruing new experiences and new perspectives so that you can come to a clearer understanding of the world and your place in it. And fortunately, your university years are possibly the best time you'll ever have to do that. They're a time when you have much more freedom to try things out compared to in high school, but when you also have a lot less commitments tying you down compared to when you've graduated. So can I give you 2 suggestions about how to make the most of your university years? The first is that you should try to get as many new and different experiences as you can. I know you all have to be high achievers just to get into this law school, and I know that high achievers are often risk-averse and like to stick to what's tried and tested. Still, if you step outside your comfort zones and take the opportunity to try out new things, you may get ideas for things that you might really enjoy, but currently have no idea even exist. And it'll help you rule out things that you would hate before you've committed too heavily to them. That works on several levels. One level, for example, is that you should do as many different extracurricular and work experience activities as possible. Join different clubs, get interesting work experiences, volunteer somewhere. The purpose of doing that is not necessarily to succeed at what you do, it's actually just to put yourself out there and to try different things. And I hasten to add, don't confine yourself to just the activities this law school and its law society offer, which can be very worthwhile, but again, can be very narrow and time-consuming. Another level is in terms of what you study. Try to study as wide a range of subject areas as you can while still keeping within your degree requirements. For example, when later you start doing your law electives, can I advise you do a range of subjects that broaden and intellectually stimulate you as much as possible? Don't just do all the commercial law subjects or all the international law subjects or all the human rights law subjects, but try to do something of everything. There's something connected to the topic of what you study that I have to say with a bit of care. It relates to the third bad decision I mentioned before, about what I decided to combine with law in my first year of university. If you're a person who isn't sure what he or she wants to do, a great benefit of arts and science is that they're generalist degrees. They let you try out in your studies a very wide range of topics to which you might not have had much exposure to previously. For example, in arts, you get to try out things like philosophy, history, literature, sociology, languages, politics, or media studies. And for science, you get to try out biology, physics, chemistry, ecology, psychology, or pure and applied maths. In fact, if you were doing your undergraduate studies in the United States, you'd be required to do a Bachelor of Arts or Bachelor of Science before you'd be allowed to specialize in law at graduate school. When Professor Martha Nussbaum, a legal academic and philosopher from the University of Chicago, visited this law school a few years ago, she made the point that this is one of the great strengths of the US educational system, despite its considerable flaws. I have to reiterate that I am definitely not saying that if you're studying anything other than art or science, you've made a bad decision. It was a bad decision for me, but what's best for you depends on your own individual circumstances, which you're in a much better position than me to judge. What I am saying is that you should think very carefully about what you're getting out of your chosen course of study, and you need to think about where it might eventually take you. There's an elephant in the room I need to address here, which is that I'm well aware that the job market for law graduates is not in a great state right now, and I can't say with any honesty if it will be a lot better by the time you all have graduated. So I do advise you to take your studies very seriously. But two things. First, don't be so fixated on getting a job that you forget about the need to work out what the right job would be for you. And second, don't forget to relax. Last week, I met a recent school leaver who's about to start at another law school. He was asking me about how to apply for jobs, which he won't be able to apply for at least another 3 years. I'll say to you what I said to him. Enjoy your university years while you still can, and in any case, it's hard to get legal work experience until at least your 3rd or 4th years, when you've done a few more law subjects. So don't be so focused on the future that you don't enjoy the present. Which in a roundabout way brings me to another point, which is that trying out new things even extends to your leisure time, which, to be clear, you should have. That is, when you relax, don't always stick to what you've done before, but try things you might gain some new insight from. It can be as simple as reading a book you haven't read, or watching a different TV series. Right after law school, I discovered what's now my favorite show, a sitcom called Community. We have fans here, I take it? It's about a failed lawyer in Colorado who has to restart his career by going to community college. Through a Spanish study group, he's forced to hang out with a bunch of people who are very different to him, but who he comes to see as a family he never had. Now, it's a wickedly funny series, but it's also blown me away for what it says about the beautiful things that can happen and for the deep hurts that can heal if you open yourself up and let other people into your life. That actually leads me to my second major suggestion about making the most of your university years. It's that while you're here, you need to find a community of friends which you feel a part of and safe in, but which also pushes you in your journey to figure out what you really want to do with your life. You want to find friends who, like yourself, appreciate that everyone has to find their own path in a complex and confusing world, and who can encourage you, and who can laugh and cry with you. And you want to be able to play the same role in their lives as well. I should say that while, right now, you may not know many or any of the other people in this room, there could be people sitting here with whom you'll form some of the closest bonds you'll ever form in your life. Now, unfortunately, there's an enemy of the sort of community that I'm describing, and that enemy is competitiveness. Competitiveness is the desire to one-up and beat others. The most obvious outlet of that desire is the grades that you get, but it can take other forms. For example, the drive for your lecturers or peers to think you're smarter than everyone else. I should clarify that competitiveness isn't the same as wanting to do the best you can according to a standard you've set for yourself. Instead, it's the desire to be better than other people. One problem with competitiveness is that it makes you obsessed with and completely fixated upon short-term success. For example, the imminent exam, or what your peers think about you right now. So it distracts you from the more important task of exploring new things so that you can figure out your long-term goals. Another problem is that competitiveness makes everyone unhappy. By definition, there's only one person who's the best at something, so everyone who's competitive but isn't the best will be bitter that they're not. And even if you happen to be that one person, you'll become anxious about maintaining that, and so be even less happy than the people you've beaten. So competitiveness is a game where you have to play to win, but which everyone in the end will lose. But perhaps the biggest problem with competitiveness is that it poisons the type of community I talked about earlier. If, within a group of friends, you're all just trying to beat each other, there's very little space for trust, or for the willingness to admit that you don't have all the answers and would like the input of your friends, who may also like the answers, but who may well offer you a different and a new and a useful perspective. By talking about all of this, I'm also trying to acknowledge another topic that the Dean mentions, namely that of mental health. To be clear, I'm neither a psychologist nor a psychiatrist, and I don't feel able to speak on this really important topic with any real expertise or in any detail. But there have been a number of studies on Australian law schools which conclude that there is an alarming rate of mental illness, including, as the Dean mentions, depression and anxiety among the student population. And a factor that's been speculated to be a key contributing cause is that of the competitive culture of those law schools. So please keep in mind the effect that competitiveness can have in class, in studying, with your friends, both on yourself and also on the people around you. Can I now start to wrap up by drawing together all the different pieces of everything I've been saying? To do that, I need to reflect a bit on my own experiences of law school, because in much of what I've said to you today, I've been speaking from a position of personal regret. And that's because a lot of the things I did as a law school, I did because I was trying too hard to keep my options open. A lot of them I enjoyed, but I really hated some others. What I didn't do is go on exchange or go on a cool overseas internship. My extracurricular activities were too narrow, and I didn't try nearly hard enough to find work experience outside of the law. And worst of all, I don't think I pushed my friends to consider trying something different anywhere near as much as I could have. So by the time I graduated, my own horizons hadn't expanded as much as they should have expanded. But around a year after I finished uni, I decided to do something a bit different and took a job at the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse. That does not roll off the tongue. I stayed there for about a year. Working at the Royal Commission was incredibly eye-opening. I ended up learning an enormous amount about one of the fundamental injustices that has plagued Australian society, and about the failures of responsibility, both by individuals and by institutions, in relation to protecting the very people who are the future of our society. And that experience has set me on a new trajectory, one which I'm still very much working out, but which I wouldn't have even dreamed of if I'd kept playing it safe. That leads me to one of the last things I want to say to you, which is, you shouldn't be afraid to make bad decisions, because every bad decision you make can have an upside. The potential upside is that from each bad decision you make, you learn a bit more each time about what makes a good decision. But for you to learn, you first need to step back and reflect on what's gone wrong and why, instead of charging ahead and repeating the same mistakes. So, can I conclude by saying the following to each of you? Congratulations again for making it here. All the best as you begin a new and really exciting part of your lives, and I look forward to hearing about what directions your lives will take. And my hope is that those will be directions which you may not have anticipated yet, but which you look back on and realize have brought you to places of which you could only have dreamed. Thank you.